This episode of Gabbing with Gaby is brought to you by the Breeders Direct Seed Company. In my opinion, the Breeders Direct Seed Company is your premier source for clones and seeds, and they are the only place that you can get the Gaby Staten Island collection. So visit Breeders Direct for all your seed and clone needs. What's up, everybody? This is Gaby, Staten Island, and we've got Nick Wolf and the Slovenian Hobbit here. We also have our special guest, Kevin Jodrey, today. And so today we're excited to talk with Kevin and have him tell us his stories and how he began in cannabis. And Kevin has a very long history in cannabis, from hustling in the drug war, working in the Bay Area in Oakland and Humboldt. He's run dispensaries, nurseries, and many grow operations. He was, I think you made the Gangier program?
Co-founded.
And yeah, you founded it. He's won Golden Tarp Awards. And excuse me?
I invented the Golden Tarp.
Oh, you invented the Golden Tarp Awards.
Invented
Great.
the Golden Tarp, yeah.
And then he's been doing international consulting and business development in cannabis for many, many years. So again, we're very excited to have you on the show, Kevin. One thing I want to say before we started is that I had heard your name before. I knew about Wonderland Nursery, but I didn't really know that much about you. And I saw some clips over on the first smoke of the day, and honestly, I was just blown away by those clips. And I friend requested you on Instagram, and I guess you followed back. And, you know, I asked you if you wanted to do the show, and I was so excited when you said that you did. So I have not watched the rest of the first smoke of the day because I always like it to be as much of a surprise when I record my podcast. But I am going to encourage everyone at some point to go check out the first smoke of the day and the interview that Kevin did with them. So anyway, Kevin, we're just going to give you the mic and tell us your story.
We were just talking before we get into the story, we were talking about this really cool event that I went to this weekend that was called the High Tea. And it was put on by Nicotine, founder of Essential Extracts. And they had it over at the Gangier campus in Southern Humboldt. And it was the second year they did it. And it was so interesting because I like tea, but I'm not hyper knowledgeable about it. And they have a group come in, I'm trying to remember their name, but they're Americans, but they've spent a lot of time in China as tea importers, exporters. And so their knowledge of tea was really comprehensive. And they bring all these really interesting varieties of tea. And what they do is they get together with Nick's team, which is Alex Sherma, Tyler, and Lindsay, who prepare the food. And then this gal named Sarah Jane does the tasting bar. And then Lena Burns does the hookah bar. And so Lena's she was one of, there's two like true Frenchy apprentices that turned master. That's Belle out of Mendo and Lena out of Humboldt. And both of them were Frenchie's full-time, developed worker, and then became masters of their own. So like her knowledge of hash is unbelievable, and her ability to create good hash. Sarah's and her fella fantastic at a flavor component. And then Alex and his team are phenomenal in chefs. So what they do is they take a look at the tea, and then they match the food pairings and the hash pairings with it. So it's these crazy flavor-centric profiles, and it's over the course of 8 hours. So every hour, another flight of hash comes out, another flight of food, and another type of tea. And so, and you can smoke what was previous, but you keep getting these fresh experiences, and it's held up, like set up at the Gangier campus and so on. And so Derek's spot is, I think, like 240 acres on top of a mountain. And so when you're up there, man, you basically just swept into the wilderness of Humboldt County, and you're drinking all this aged tea, and you're smoking all this hash, and you're eating all this food. And you're kind of like sucked into a vortex of gustatory goodness. And when you leave, you're kind of sad that it had to end, because
I'm
you kind of
drooling.
wish you could spend every day just drinking really good tea and smoking really good hash and eating really good food in an environment filled with people that were, vibing the same. So if they ever do another one, man, or if you ever get a chance to go to one of those type of pairings, I'd recommend it. It's just an
I
absolute
was going to ask,
fascinating experience.
was it open to the public or was it by invitation only?
It was invitation. You paid to get into it, but the concept doesn't have to be. You could create one of your own, where you one of your friends is good at the culinary. One of your friends is good at the hash collection, meaning like assembling the hash to match the food, and then you get somebody who's really knowledgeable about the tea end of it. And it's just really fun, because the thing with the tea was, it's such an ancient culture. And when I was in Asia, what I noticed was the tea ceremony matches the prayer ceremony, matches the hash consumption ceremony. And so there's these periods through the day where you pray, you take tea, and you smoke. And we kind of, and it's ritualistic, but ritualistic in a really healthy way. So I think that, the ability for people to be able to sit down and enjoy these things in this regard, because for at least 15 minutes, you stop what you're doing, you give thanks, you drink tea, which clears your head, kind of opens you up, and then the cannabis makes you connect into the universe.
That
What
sounds
was your
incredible.
favorite combination?
Oh my God, you're talking about something that is happening here in my area with a family member of mine, he has one of the oldest bamboo gardens in Slovenia. He's a professor of art,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a sauna in the bamboo garden, and he's doing tea ceremony since 2 years now, like tea ritual, like we say. And everything you tell now is like home, to me. Like I'm the European correspondent here, so
Mm-hmm.
first of all, it's really big honor for me to talk to you. I mean, I've been listening
Oh
to
no,
you.
it's my pleasure, man. We're all like, I got lucky. I mean, I spent the majority of my career hiding, right? So the majority of your career when you're in the hustle is, you making sure nobody knows who you are except everybody you hustle with. So you develop a really good, strong, like, name reputation. But I was never really on forums. I didn't. I use social media kind of on a minimal level. If you really take a look at my output, it's low. What's high is my engagement and me being involved with other people's work in that regard, because it makes it fun. But if I have to do it myself, it feels forced. And because and it's not against people who live online. It's just purely, if you're living in cannabis with licensed operate, even in the past, like large operations, you're running a large operation, you don't have time to be online all day. So it it just never fit my life. And then when I got older, because I'm older, the online lifestyle wasn't so critical. It's just a really great tool to meet people. And I use it in kind of like a duality, where I'm a sports freak. And I don't mean like I like watching sports. I like sports science, and I like being athletic. And so the internet lets me keep track of all these people around the world that I got to train with and got to work with. So I get like all my sports related connections, and then I get hobby stuff, and then I get cannabis. So it lets me have like a really diverse global friend base.
Mhm.
But I just kind of look at it like that. So I don't get so triggered. So online stuff doesn't, like, where like it, to me, it's not real. If for most people, if they shut down their Instagram, their whole game ends that day. And it
Yeah,
doesn't end my game at all, because
yeah.
I have functional physical businesses and operations, and I actually work in the industry globally. So for me, enjoying the conversation is what I dig, and that's why, as I took a look when you guys first popped up, And then I saw the interview you did with Mark, and then I saw there was Wolf on the other day, and I love Wolf because he's a fucking genius. And he's just an interesting dude too, because he's such a salty bastard. And he has to be, because he's salty as hell, but I love him because I respect what he did. Was he really, really, really did his homework, and he did create that initial, what we would call sea of green, where ultra high density planting sites, and he developed cultivars that fit that methodology. And then his knowledge of lighting is primo. So like, I got lucky that when it comes to lighting, I was able to spend time with brilliant light scientists from around the world on projects. So it allows me to get access to information I otherwise wouldn't. But for the average individual that isn't hanging out with light scientists from the Bill Gates Institute, Wolf is probably the most accessible, smart person you can get. And he's not afraid to really break the information down, because he's not afraid of you taking it and suddenly surpassing him. You'd have to spend your whole life studying it in order to catch him, and it's not like he's paused either. So that's what I love about, Good Guess. So when I saw the Good Guess and I was checking it out, and I think I said to you, Gaby, like, oh, good show. And then that's kind of began our conversation. And I just think that, the intent of what you're trying to do is good. And for me, being able to be on podcasts with people that want to explore the world we're in is critical. And like I said, it's not that I think there's a rank in cannabis. It's just that most spend their time in their house. So your totality of what you see is relatively small. It doesn't mean your product isn't phenomenal. It could be some of the best in the world coming out of your one lighter in your bedroom. And that's real. It's just really about exposure to a totality, a bigger picture. And I think that that's kind of what I got lucky to have, is that my career was built during like the peak of the drug war. And when I got into medical cannabis, I was already around 40 years old by that point. So I already had, since I was 12, so I already had, almost 28 years of playing in the sandbox before I got into medical cannabis. And medical cannabis to me is not that I had a 215, which is the medical recommendation in California. I had that in 96 because I knew Dr. Mikaria. We were friends. So I grabbed the 215, but it was to protect me from having like an ounce in my pocket. I knew it wasn't going to protect me on the level I was at because my plant counts were insane. So it was a little different reason. And so I never considered myself medical. I just had a 215. I knew the architects of that era. We were friends. I had access. It was when I got into running a dispensary that I officially said I'm in medical cannabis, because the emphasis of your work changes. And you get into the dispensary end of it, and you think you're going to be doing like storefront sales, and you don't really understand that you're becoming a semi-hospice. And you start to see this reality of people who use cannabis in this essential method, essential need, and it changes your perspective of what you do. And because I was already, what I would say, successful, I didn't get into medical cannabis because that was my time to come up. I was already up. I actually lost money going into medical cannabis because I had to give up all the crooked hustling I was doing, which was really where the money was. But I knew there was like this two-part reason. There was one, that it was the only path forward, because I knew that the world we were in was going to change. And once I get involved in the medical end of it, it was this catharsis of helping people that you don't know, that have no ability to help you back. It kind of links you into the human experience in a way I'd never been linked in. And it made my life really kind of like rich in a way I'd never experienced.
I wanted to say, you have this kind of thing that you live in your life, a way of life, and then because of the system, you see the way and you choose the way to do it in another way. Like from your perspective, from my perspective and your perspective would be the term from illegality to legality. how to make it legal now, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you are, you know, of course, from perspective Europeans now, we are just not legalizing, decriminalizing now. The system that you have now is like you already have 10 years of legalization behind you. We don't. That's a
Totally. No,
very, it's different perspective, yeah?
it is. And I knew that it's like everything you do in life, right? You can't take skills from one. It's called extrapolating, where you take something from something and apply it to something else. And the problem is that there's these assumptions that the skills or the information transfers linearly, and it's not linear. It's big gaping holes of lack of understanding. And so when I got that opportunity to take over that operation, and it was neat too, because the operation I took over was one of the second or third dispensaries in the state of California. It was one of the oldest operations in the country, and it was failing. The management was confused, and it had a great team. The people that I ended up, running were good people. They were about the job. They were good with people, but your management was off, and they didn't understand. Really, at a fundamental level, they didn't understand drug dealing. They didn't quite understand what the needs of the people who come in the store are, and how these little things we do make that experience so much different. And so when I came in, I took over the spot as the cultivation director, but I really kind of ended up becoming like cultivation director / operationals manager. And I changed the way we operated the business. And so I took a business that was going bankrupt and failing. And the first 2 years I ran it, we won Best Dispensary in Northern California for 2 years in a row. And I always tell people that. I said, listen, I have never had a day of retail experience in my life. Never worked in a restaurant, never worked in a store. I spent my whole fucking life in the dope game. What people need to understand is that we do understand people pretty well on terms of how they want to be treated. And if you understand how people want to be treated, you can do your best to satisfy. You're never going to do perfect all the time. You're going to fail. And you're going to make mistakes. But if you put the effort out, people forgive you for your failures because they see that there's an effort that is genuine. And what happens is they learn to kind of meet you in the middle, and then they teach you how to help them better. And so I allowed the people that came in the business to kind of guide me as to what they wanted and needed. And it allowed me to better understand. And I think one of the jokes was that I took my desk out of my office and I put it in the lobby. So I had an empty desk in the lobby that I sat at to do all the, conversation. And what it did is it allowed anybody who came in the business to access somebody that when you talk to people at a counter, you don't feel powerful because you feel there's a filter. But if you can talk to the manager and you can get access to them, and the same information from the manager's mouth is coming out of the worker's mouth, it validates the worker. So now when people come in, they start to understand that the people that are at the counter are intelligent too. So that's the sin of when I came into the business, nobody wanted to talk to me at first, right? So I laughed. So I had my secretary go to the store, go to Staples, right? The office supply. I said, go get me a badge. Here, write this. And it said cultivation director in my name, right? And I put it on. I said, watch this shit. People look at you, then they look at your badge and it says cultivation director. Instantly, you're smart. So I said, we all need badges that just say bad motherfucker on them. So this way, anybody that looks at this thing automatically thinks you're elevated. And now the conversation is different because the issue with cannabis is that because people spent so much time in seclusion, semi-seclusion, working with it, developing it, they've developed some unbelievably strong relationship ties. But their overall knowledge of the picture, in many cases, most, is kind of skewed. And so when they come into stores, they always want to tell everybody, I know more than you because you're just a worker in a store and I'm this person who knows all this. And what happens is the worker and the customer can't find common ground to communicate, and neither's left happy. The bud tenders are like, these jobs suck. And the people who come into stores are always saying to bud tenders, you're stupid. And it's not true. it's just really this kind of conflict. It's like your transmission isn't working correctly because the clutch isn't stopping the flywheel and you're not able to shift. The synchronizers aren't working. So you're just grinding. But when you can align everything, everything meshes. And I think that's what I was really trying to do most, was create that meshing. And
make relationships.
And it hadn't been done because the world of cannabis, and even in storefront, was all this, secrecy still. And what it did is it created a lack of information transmittal. So you weren't creating information in the facility and getting it into the hands of the public. And so what I did is I kind of ripped the doors off the place and let the people come in. And then I left the place and brought the information into the public. And it wasn't about information about the shop. It was just really, how do you look at a topic? And I don't think I'm omnipotent. Like, it's funny, I'm outspoken on stuff, and sometimes I'm prone to add a little bit to it, where when I say all, I really mean the majority, right? And so when I say everybody does this, people are like, no, there's an outlier. And I'm like, I know, but if you can find an outlier, it means most. And so I kind of work on these generalities. But what it does, it makes it simple to make decisions and move things quickly. And it allowed me to be able to help people understand, these are the things that are inside dispensaries. These are how we use these products. If I was you on a budget, this is how I would approach it. And I didn't try to send you to my store. I wasn't worried about it. Drugs don't need to be advertised. They just have to be presented. And I think that's where a lot of people in retail don't quite catch dope dealing, that you don't really sell drugs. You just provide them, and they sell themselves, and people give you money as an exchange for this rare item. And if you can be cool about the process, you have word of mouth.
Your story sounds so similar to mine. And, this is like a reoccurring theme that, we all, even Sasha, it's like we're so similar, 6,000 miles away.
Yeah.
But I opened up my hydro store, the Garden Spout, in 2002. And when I opened up my store, the general practice when you walked into a grow shop was you said as little as possible to the people that worked there. You grabbed your shit and you got out. Okay, and when you got out, you looked both ways to make sure nobody was following you. And
you used your cousin's car.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when I opened up my shop, I did something a little bit different. It was actually very different. Nobody had done it at the time. First of all, my store was in downtown Willits, right in the center of town. And when you were driving north or south through Willits, you basically had to drive by my store. And I had a 1,000-watt grow light on I think it was called the Omega Garden, the spinning garden with a 1,000-watt light in the middle of it.
And it was on that little cam, and the plants would,
they would spin, right? Around. But people that were driving by, they were just blown away by what they were seeing, a high pressure sodium light in a window at a grow shop. This was pretty unheard of at the time. And another thing I did was I put a coffee bar in my store. So when people came in, I gave them an espresso or whatever they wanted, and they had a place to sit down. And I made it a place where the customers felt comfortable talking to us.
Totally.
And that was something that had never happened at a grow store before. Mm-hmm. You were actually told exactly the opposite, is don't talk to us. Please don't mention cannabis specifically.
Tomatoes. We're growing tomatoes. Everybody was a fucking tomato farmer. But you have to be bold in order to break through dogma. And for me, I got lucky in that regard. I really believe it, that I entered public cannabis at the right time because I was already grown and I already had a good reputation in the hustle, which is why the legal worked for me so well. Because once I got in the legal, I was able to reach out to all the people I had done business with in the illegal, and it instantly allowed us to start moving plant material at large quantities. And so all of that stuff was, I really believe, because I was 40 and I already fought a couple felonies, and I already had a lifetime of like struggle and grind and then real money. So when I got into this, it was more like an education of what's the future going to be. I just didn't realize I was going to get this education on medical cannabis the way I did. And it was this incredible experience. But out of that facility is where the plant ACDC came from. That was the first CBD plant development in the country. And over the next couple of years, you know, I mean, I ended up personally releasing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of free CBD based plants globally. So at one point in time, I was like this. I was like this genetics stallion in hemp, because all these countries around the world began their hemp programs with genetics they got from us, and people couldn't believe that, you know, I was giving it away for free. But I had this idea that when we started the project, it was originally designed to help the doctor's wife. And he had this idea that if we could increase the cannabinoid stimulation and get the ECS activated with cannabinoids in acid form, we should be able to see an overall health increase. And once we started to see it, because remember, you're running a shop, right? So we have Canopy and we have customers. So now we bring in data collection and we bring in other people to work with the patients, so we can really start to find out what's the cannabinoids doing and what are the other things around you doing. And it just gave me this insight that was unbelievable, because no one in history up to that point had ever had this happen, right? So even the Israelis who like find these molecular compounds, I talk to them because they do not have the number of people coming through their programs we did. Like, we dwarfed people in what was taking place. And I was just a facilitator. I didn't come up with the idea. I didn't do the breeding. I just said to the doctor when he approached me, I said, wow, this is so interesting. I don't think cannabinoid therapy could do that much. So I was totally wrong, but I believed it could do 10%. And I said, if we could just get 10% of what's coming out of your mouth to happen, it's worth it. And it ended up being 200%, 300% greater than what came out of the mouth. So I took this risk for a very limited benefit for what, but the benefit, if 10 people out of 100 have a better life, it's worth the risk. But it was the forerunner of it. And no one knew what to do with the plants. Like, they run the program, doctor created for his wife, but no one knew how to monetize it because nobody wanted pot that didn't get you high. There was no alternative cannabinoid medicine at that time. This is the beginning, like fucking day one shit. And I realized, though, from the patients and what was happening, because the people we were working with weren't cannabis smokers. They were people who were in horrific levels of inflammatory pain. They had internal stomach pain. They had pain in the intestines. They had rheumatoid arthritis. They had all these issues of aging and falling apart. They were the ones that really came into the program and adopted it most. And so what I saw was this sudden change in validation for people who consume cannabis psychoactively, because they started to understand that if I can derive a benefit from something, who am I to say you're wrong with the way you derive benefit? So I knew that if I drove the genes into the system and I got people to benefit in a non-psychoactive manner, then the work that I do, which I'm interested in, which is what I do as a farmer, as a nursery operator, is psychoactive cannabis, it would allow that to exist. So I had an agenda of benefit, but really it was a benefit of how do you get people to reverse their stance on the drug war, right? So, like, I'm born in '66. That was when Nixon, when he was in the Senate, puts out that first note. Then I'm a teenager in 1980 when Reagan comes in. 83, I catch my first multi-felony, right, for distribution, cultivation. I get dragged out of high school and spend fucking the 11th grade incarcerated. I get out of high school, and my neighborhood's a crime zone, and my family's in organized crime. So, like, I grew up going to prison to visit relatives, and which wasn't traumatic. And then when I was locked up, it wasn't traumatic either. It was normal. And the problem was, all my friends were about to go do life sentences, and I watched it happen. they either got killed or they killed somebody or they caught, multi-decade sentences for criminal activity, RICO Act shit. And I didn't want it, right? I was 18. I was like, fuck, like, is this, and I loved weed, but I was like, this can't be my life. Like, I really don't want to spend the rest of my life in goddamn prison. And everyone, when I get to be 18, we used to swing by the prison and go visit our friends through the fucking fence at the medium security prison because we knew their yard time, and we would roll up in the car and fucking yell to each other through the fence like it was that normal. And so I go in the military so I could go get an education in dive salvage. So I figured, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get a job as a salvage diver, and I'm going to go work globally on oil rigs. That's how I'm going to get out of the crime of my neighborhood. When I go in the military and become a diver, it was the peak of the drug war. It was 1985, right? So they start loaning me out to the DEA and the DOJ to go be the diver that they drop out of helicopters on these fucking vessels. So all of a sudden, I'm 19 years old, and I'm looking at hundreds of tons of weed. I'm looking at fucking tons of cocaine. And I'm just like, this is crazy, right? And I'm dying because, it was so opposite of what I had done. But when I was on one of those drug raids, they raided a Canadian group that had never been busted, but were always being looked at. So they had like a 200-foot ship, and it was sterile, but they were international killers. And I'm in the galley, the kitchen, and I'm hanging out in my wetsuit and shit, because I just got done doing the hull inspection and all the other shit. And they bring all the crew members into the galley to hold them while they search the whole vessel, right? So there's ships coming and there's fucking helicopters. And I'm chilling. And the captain says to me, yo, we're all salvage divers too. Like, we're all divers. So we start talking diving and shit. And I'd grown up around fucking criminals, right? So I wasn't tripping on the fact that these guys were all criminals. And the captain says to me, what did you do before you went in the military? And I looked around and I was like, the same shit you guys do, but at a smaller level. And he was like, why did you stop? And I said, because I caught a case. And I said, and my whole neighborhood's all doing life. We call it life on the installment plan, where you basically are in prison for 2, you're out for 3, you're in for 4, you're out for 2, you're in for fucking 3, you're out for 2, you're in for 6. And so a lot of my partners ended up doing this, just a life of fucking incarceration. And I just said, I just didn't want to do it. And he was like, herb is the future. He said, it's way better. He goes, you don't want to be a diver. You don't want to do dive salvage. You don't want to work for the oil companies. They all suck. He goes, you're a piece of fucking hamburger to these guys. And what you want is you want to go back to what you did before. And he said, just trust me. The world will change. And so it caught me because I was far more comfortable speaking to him honestly than I was anybody I worked with. So all the people that, you're around in your life, if you're raised in a criminal family where, like, you learn not to fucking rat as a little kid, and you're used to seeing relatives pull fucking robberies and shit, and you're used to seeing stolen goods, and you're used to having family members in the newspaper for fucking shooting people, you're okay with that. But when you go into the normal world, it's really difficult. So I can function mentally in that world, but in terms of operationally, it's so different because our world is what it was. And I was more comfortable talking to the team that was being raided than the guys that they had put me with to do the raiding. And it all clicked. So when I got off of that mission and went back to Hawaii, I bought my first plant science books because I started growing around 80. So 78, I start smoking. The neighborhood's trafficking. I get lucky in this weird way that my neighborhood was where all the fishermen would go out into the bay and get the weed from all the boats. So all the herb was being still shipped in through vessel, right? And so I got to see quantity that was from global, from people that had their shit together, so they'd be able to tell you this is good and this is not good. the good batch usually comes in around then. When it comes in, we'll come by and grab you and we'll show it to you. So I got this crazy education from these older criminals about quality drugs, you know, and they knew where the bales were coming from. And so they would say, hey, this is Mexican weed. I remember when the first Indoor came out in that early 80s out of Pennsylvania. So in 84, I think, was the first time I saw Indoor. And it was gorgeous. And I said, whoa, that's crazy. Because everything was a change. And so you have this background. So then I started growing in like 1980 with my friend Gary, but I didn't have a green thumb. I had a brown thumb. I killed everything I touched. So when I realized that I wanted to get into cannabis, I only really understood like you grow it or you sell it. I didn't understand the million things that were going to emerge from it. But I said, all right, let me go get some books. And I started to study plant science. And the day I got out of the military in 89, I used the government vehicle in uniform to go to Berkeley Indoor Garden to go buy all my grow lights and spark up in Oakland because I was ready. And
I love that place.
I was fucking good. Victor was cool as fuck. That was at the time when you had to have a driver's license to buy hydroponic equipment because they made you register all your shit.
Oh.
And
I showed up in 91. Store. Victor was still there, but I didn't have to show ID.
Yeah, neither. I'd have to either because it was this weird thing. I walked in the store the first time because I just wanted to check it out. And I was in the service then. And they had a major plumbing leak. Water was fucking spraying out of the wall. And because I had all this work on shipboard water and dewatering, and so I understand fucking water flow well. So I said, hey, wait a second. I said, I think I could just fucking fix this for you while I'm here until you get a plumber to come in. So I shut it all down, and he was so happy that his store wasn't when he got fucked up that he remembered me. And so when I came back, he had them put the lights on his fucking tab.
Nice.
So like I paid for it, but it was all under Victor's name. So at that time I didn't have to worry about, you know, the follow through. And then I spark up in Oakland, and my boy Azel, who he's passed, but he was like my older brother. He hooked me up with some of the Oakland hustlers. So I had a Jamaican partner named Greggy. I had another brother named Ricky, and I had this white chick named Sue. And Sue is where all the ultra high level products were coming from, like out of the Mendocino area. So through Sue, I got to see my first real exquisite California outdoor. It was, I mean, stunning, right? So I had a pipeline to that. Through Ricky, it was good quality, and Greggy, same thing. They both had really good access. And I had this killer group that I could fuck with. And then I ended up tying in with this dude named Alejandro, and I was trying to do business with him, but I was being filtered by this cat we called Jailbird Pat. So me and Jailbird Pat were buddies, but he was always in and out of the joint. And I said to him, I said, listen, I said, you're slowing down my fucking distribution business. So why don't you just sell me the contact? Let me just buy it from you. Tell me how much this fucking guy's phone number's worth, and then give it to me, and then I'll just go to the guy direct. So me and Pat worked out a deal on how much the connect was worth, and then I tie into Alejandro. When I tied into Alejandro was tied right into the Mexican pipeline. And so what I started doing with Al was having the people from Mexico come into NorCal, and I would gather what I considered really good commercial samples, and we'd show it to them so they could understand the quality level we needed to beat that product. So it allowed us to start steering what was moving into the Bay, and then I was pushing that shit into the East Coast. And we got it to a point where I only had to work like 3 days a month, right? So I could do 3 days of work in the Bay and then not come home for a month. So for a good like year and a half, I was only home for like little touch points because I was busy fucking around as a young dude with money. And I would go to the Bay, hook up with Alejandro. We'd fucking tear it up in rage because he was a fucking nut. And then I had a warehouse that I rented. And that's where we would go and put all the units, crate everything up, get it set, fucking ship it out on Monday, and then I'd go. So all that barrier time, you know, it was incredible, but so much of it was really and I just still hear those guys' voice in my mind to this day. You need to go back. And I'm grateful because I think I would have had a really good life doing what I was doing, but I would never have had the exposure to so many diverse people. See, I think that you can make money doing a lot of shit, but being in cannabis, it touches so many different demographics that it allows me to have this fucking network that's just absolutely mind-bending to me, that I'm touching people that are happy with nothing and people who are worth $20 billion. And they're both cool.
For
But
example,
it's huge range.
I saw that you have been in Afghanistan last year or 2
Pakistan.
like Pakistan,
Yeah.
yes. That's so inspirational for me in this time that somebody from the cannabis high class people like you are directly goes to Pakistan and does this like that. I mean,
no, it was
no,
my
I mean,
it was
it
my
is
privilege, my brother. It was my privilege because
no,
I
because
dreamt of it my
this
whole
is the
life
real
too,
shit, you know. This is the real shit because I've been
Yeah.
traveling, but now in my time, because I have little kids and I'm a lone parent, and you know, in this time I cannot travel, you know. I'm stuck to the place because I have a library of cannabis in the neighboring country, which is like few meters away, you know. But it is a privilege to be with somebody that is down to earth so much that he can still travel, and he's interested in other cultures and other perspectives and other kind of how you look at the cannabis plant.
And you
Because
give back to them as
yeah,
well, right?
yes, and
Like
I
give back.
you're not just going there and stealing their
Yes,
genetics and
give.
profiting
No,
off
no,
Of
of
no.
it.
course,
I'm
you
not.
know.
I didn't steal any. So I mean, like I rubbed some fucking feathers the wrong way, and it's just because in life, if you do what you do, you will. You can't worry about being somebody who pleases every single person with every action you do, or you'll never fucking do anything, right? So like anytime you do anything, there's going to be an opinion on it. But the stuff that was in cannabis was when I was a kid, and I started like I remember I was a cannabis freak since I was 12. The idea that I had this dream as a kid that one day I would go to every cannabis producing region on earth and I would just get to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to do anything profound. I just wanted to see the world that built our world. And over the course of my life, I kind of did. But Pakistan was the untouchable. Because I'm American, and like holy fuck, we nonstop war and conflict. So when the Pakistanis reached out to me and said, we'd love to have you come over, and I'm like, but for what? Like, what is it that you want me to do? And they said, we really just want to expose you to our world, and hopefully when you leave, you'll be able to bring that good memory back with you and let other people know.
Mm-hmm.
And their desire wasn't just cannabis centric at all. It was that was important. It was that cannabis was the vehicle, the tool that was going to create the connection between us. Because what they wanted to be able to show Pakistan as a totality, where when you went to the village to look at the weed, how did the people treat you? When you had food with the people after looking at the weed, how did the people treat you? While you were looking for the weed, what was the country like? And so it was such a elegant, beautiful idea that the Landrace Genetics team and Let's Be Friends Pakistan had, that once they laid it out to me, over the phone, I was like, I'm down. I would love to go. And the irony is that as soon as I'm getting ready to get on the plane, I get all these texts on my phone, and I got one if I still kept it. It opens up with, they're going to cut off your fucking head. And I'm laughing because you're about to get on a plane to go to Pakistan, right? And people are saying to you, they're going to cut off your fucking head. And I'm cracking up, and I'm like, no, they're not going to cut off my head. And what I don't think people catch is that, because I go to all these odd fucking locations over the course of my career that most would not go to. And it's really learning about risk mitigation. Like, you learn how to weigh your odds. And so if you live in the hustle and then you do dangerous, deadly shit for a job, you start to kind of learn like where you feel safe and where you don't. And when you don't feel safe, you're really pretty honest with why. And so you logically move yourself to a position of surety where you say, I think the odds are good. I'll come back with my fucking head attached to my shoulder. But if I didn't feel that, there's no point in going because you're not there to be a martyr to get your fucking head lopped off on a video. So what I knew was the people that I was speaking with, they were really clear about their agenda. And their agenda was to highlight the beauty of a country through cannabis. Specifically, once we started to really talk, they weren't aware that there was this man in Humboldt named Douglas Fir. So Doug Fir is this local back to lander, 1968 gets here, one of the original back to land groups. And they're raiding cannabis in like late October then, because everything they were growing in California was what? Fucking Southeast Asian, Mexican, and Colombian. The broadleaf shit hadn't really come into Cali until 78, 80. That's when it really first started coming in. And the impetus was, if we can get plants that finish a month earlier than the raid, we'll have our crop out of the ground. So Doug and his buddy connect with a rug dealer out of Eureka, who was Pakistani, and they fly to Islamabad, and they travel out to the Tirra Valley, and they gather the genes, and then he ships that kilo back in 10 packages or 12 packages. And 6 of them arrived, and 6 of them didn't make it. So half a key, 500 grams, a pound, of seed makes it to Doug direct into Humboldt County. And what he did that was different than anyone else that had received any Afghani lines, Pakistani lines, was he shared the stock with the locals. And what it did is it kick-started the broadleaf revolution in our area. And it lets people harvest on time, and then you get into that mid-80s zone and indoor is on fire. And it was those plants that could flower under those conditions because the equatorials just don't thrive commercially in those situations, right?
Yeah.
So all these things line up, and it also lines up with where America changed its desire of effect. So like America in the 60s and 70s was looking to get high and spiritually uplifted. You get into like 1980 when you get into the Reagan era, and if you take a look at drug usage and general tone, you start to see that disparity between people who made money rising up in the chart and people who were typically workers who made good money dropping in the chart. So 1980 in America is like a critical date because it's the change of the society's state of mind.
And so,
that's when you started to notice cocaine and heroin re-explode. And cannabis mirrors these other drugs. And so we went from having Thai weed, Colombian, and Mexican, which you get on import, into broadleaf. And people didn't bitch that they weren't getting their old type of high because the new consumers coming in felt weight on them. Remember the end of the 70s, America was a shithole. We were in hyperinflation. We had the Iranian issue where our embassy had been seized. We had, he had that debacle in the Vietnam War. So like the public sees their country negatively. And because of it, they see the world negatively and it starts to change drug usage. So what I do is like to this day, I look at what's taking place in the society around me and I use that to interpret why the things that people consume popular. And it's critical with drugs because it mirrors it so clearly. And so it helps me understand trends. Are we in a trend that's rising? Is it flat or is it declining? And it helps me understand genetic development where is it worth getting into that direction or do I think it's going to have a quick peak? And so that time period was so tumultuous, but it let you kind of see these transitions from the 70s, and then we get into the 80s, the drug war kicks in, the valuation explodes, cannabis is worth 1,000 in Humboldt, it goes up in some cases, 6, and the money pours in, it changes completely. But Doug is a really nice, down-to-earth dude who still lives in a cabin, who still lives off-grid, who still makes tea for you with a fucking like a propane torch, you know? And the idea that I was going to get to go to Pakistan and walk the ground that my friend walked just really caught me. So I told the team in Pakistan, I said, hey, we need to call this like the footsteps of Doug Fir. And they all got caught up in it too, where we're like, they could understand what I was trying to do, which was start to connect the dots so that we could tell the story, so that people could see the relevance and understand that a few people went to these countries and brought back the genes that launched a $50 billion empire. And the people that gave us the seed stock, in all intents and purposes, got fucked because they never made any long-lasting benefit from the relationship. And so what we tried to do was recreate the footsteps of Doug Fir, but instead of just Doug walking the Silk Route into Pakistan, I wanted the Silk Route to extend into the United States and let the Pakistanis walk into our lives too. So I said, hey, I think I have an idea how like we can frame it. And it went really well. And they brought in a team of people from Europe. They brought in my buddy Danny from Green Walrus, who does the documentary work, and he came in with John, who's a filmmaker, and our other partner, who's a filmmaker as well, who now does Major League Baseball stuff, but in film. And so they were able to capture so much, like some of the footage that was captured. It's awe-inspiring. And so what you got to do was look at not just weed. We traveled for 1,300 miles through the Kura Mountains. So, we're walking the Silk Route. You're seeing the roads that the hominids and Neanderthals merged on. You're finding all this native cannabis running wild in the mountains that humans are not playing with. Every village you went to had a crop.
Kevin,
every farmer was kind.
Tell me just how it is to look at the mountains there, to see this magnificent,
It's crazy.
Just explain the feeling, man. Tell, because I was in these places, not in this, but in Mongolia I was, but this is very similar, It's just so the environment has so much impact.
I live in the mountains of Humboldt, right? So I'm in the Pacific Range, and I've been to Colorado a bunch, and and seen that type of elevation. But Pakistan was the first time I ever really understood verticality, where we were walking around at 10,000 feet, and when you looked up, there was another 15,000 above you.
Yes.
And you look down these canyons, and there was miles of distance to the base, and you look up, and there's miles above you, and it helped me understand the mountain culture, similar as like a lot of my good friends and like what I call family are Polynesian, right? So Samoan, Hawaiian, Tokelauan, Tongan, and that's boat culture. Those were ancient navigators and sailors, and they sailed these massive outriggers all over the ocean but it's boat culture. And boat culture is you learn to shut the fuck up and work together, or they throw you off the boat. And so it's this teamwork type environment because you have to be a team player on a fucking canoe out in the middle of the ocean. I don't see that in many cultures because we just don't have the need. But in the Kura Mountains, I saw it again. And what I saw was that you had to be nice to strangers, because if you were a stranger in those places, you definitely needed a way out of the environment. It was so massive that there's no photos, no pictures. Until you see the Hooper Glacier, you don't quite catch what a glacier looks like. You don't realize it's an ice flow coming out of a mountain, and every little ripple in it is like 150 feet tall. The fins that are on the top of these things, you're talking 10-story building ripples, and massive moving through these regions. It just made you feel so insignificant and vulnerable. And
why were you at such an elevation
That's the
I mean,
base
there's
of
no
it because
cannabis there,
Pakistan's
right?
the rooftop of the world. So
Yes.
once you get off, like you go to the coast, what's that, Karachi? You go down to the ocean part. I didn't go that far. We spent our whole time up in those Hindu Kush, Himalaya, Kura mountain range. Once you get into those, you're at base elevation 10 grand.
But there's no cannabis growing at 10,000 feet,
Oh, sure
correct?
there is.
It is.
At
Yes, yes.
10,000
That's
feet.
where
Oh
all
my
this
God, I didn't
weed's
know.
coming
Yes.
from. Yeah, all this is coming at 10.
The best shit is coming from there.
Yeah, oh, it was incredible. And the native herb was crazy looking because when you get to see wild cannabis, what you get to see is these plants that are built for survivability. And what is survivability for cannabis? Not too much biomass, which would technically rot. And so what you have is you have big giant trikes on small bracts, small flower sets, but just insane aromas. And you would just see anywhere where there was water that deposited, you'd see this. And in your mind, you can see the people moving across the Silk Route, eating seed, shitting it out, seed moving around, animals eating seed, shitting it out, people getting seed to eat and dropping it. And you realize that it was this massive gene flow through this entire region. And it's humbling. It allows you to understand that, that, and everywhere we went, I asked every village, like, how long have you guys been making hash? How long have you been working in this, your family? And they said, well, we all got here, 1,500 years ago, 1,800 years ago, 2,100 years ago. And everyone said the same thing. Herb was here when we got here. So our families only know herb. And you're talking to hash makers who, when you're talking to them, they're telling you the first memories I have as a child is helping my dad beat hash in the shack. And their dad had beat hash and their grandfather had beat hash for fucking 2,000 years. So when they held resin in their hands and they moved it in their fingers, and it was just so familiar. And it just
Kevin,
helps you understand how much we fucked up the entire education of cannabis because the drug war took all this information out and removed it.
Mhm.
hey Kevin, do you mind describing some of the terpenes that you were finding on the living cannabis up at 10,000 feet? Like, what were some of the most memorable ones that you experienced there?
What's funny is, like, the wild populations, you saw a myriad of aromas present because it's survival. But when you're talking about like fixed populations, and remember now, like, so India doesn't do any culling of male or female, so it's total open population. But Pakistan and Afghanistan, they select males. So they leave all the females, they select the males, and so what they do is they go through the males in the field and they leave the ones that have the best characteristics. But it's not as a single plant. This one had great aroma. This one had great survivability. This one right here had great flower set. This one had, incredible bract size. So it's they don't go after. I was in a discussion the other day about this, but it was about like pheno hunting and the idea that cannabis we pheno hunt. And I said they don't do that in ag. And people say yes, they do pheno hunt in ag, but most ag is in breeding, right? So if you're hunting plants that are able to reproduce on themselves, which is considered a perfect plant, you're finding a plant, but it's through seed production and the genetic movement. It is not just that single organism. Cannabis, we go through huge populations to find a plant. And the problem is that you're having to go through huge populations to find a plant. And that means as a breeder, you're not doing a good job. That's poor breeding because you're not able to neck the traits down. So when you go into like open pop, everything's everywhere. And you'll see still patterns. With closed pop, you see what the farmers like. So each farm chooses the males they want to work with. And what I noticed from my journals was that the aromas matched the crops that were grown around them. So when we first come down like into Nagar Valley, it's when you started to get like into all the mangoes and fruits because there was more of apple and fruit that they were around. And then as we start to go into the areas where you had, like walnut and other types of nut tree, there was other profiles. And then the potato other profiles. And so when I journaled the whole thing and then looked at the picture, like what was the big clusters, what you had what we would call like the traditional earthy profiles that we associate with broadleaf. And then you get into what we would call fuel here, but I also call it chemical, but chemical that was turned up. And I mean like hairspray that had been blasted in your face and then lit on fire. Smells that were penetrating like, an acre away from where you shook the plant. People were like, whoa, if the wind moved, that stuff was coming. And so it was these really interesting sets. And then we noticed that like around a lot of the potato was the deep volatile sulfurs, which is, septic tank, rotting meat, decay, really heinous, foul aromas. But what I didn't see in the
It sounds delicious.
Oh, it was great. It was great. But what I didn't see in the hash was any fuel profiles. And I asked them why. And I said, with all this chemical and fuel, why don't I see it in the product? And they said, because we off-gas it. We allow the plants to sit at harvest. We let them sit out in the cold. And I said, and that process is doing what? He goes, it's letting us get a lot of these other volatiles off the plant that we don't like as a consumer. And I said, why don't you like that type of effect? And he's like, it was hysterical because it was so honest. He said, oh, we'll get too high and fall off the mountain and die.
Yes.
And it's hard to explain this to somebody, but like we were at the Hunza Inn, which is this killer spot in Hunza. And me and a bunch of the Pakistani brothers hiked up the mountain early in the morning, and we're like struggling to climb this mountain. And all of a sudden, it was time to go to school for the kids. And all these kids come skipping down the mountain like a bunch of fucking goats. And there's old men carrying children on their back. And I mean, like, we're climbing like we're fighting for our lives. And these guys are skipping down this shit. And if anybody falling, you die. And we're cracking up because they're so acclimated to it, but they don't like to have reduced awareness because they just know that you can't make mistakes in that type of situation. So they said, no, we gas all that off and it opens up this. And what it was hash that had, like traditional hash that you almost never see with all these subtle fruit and floral influences. That's the first time, and I've seen a lot of fucking hash. I've never seen hash when they broke up a chunk of it. You thought you were in a fruit and flower shop.
Wow.
And it was because they had off-gassed all these other masking agents that they don't like as an impact, and it revealed all this other stuff. So it was just really, it was a beautiful experience, and I really hope that, and that's what we tried to, and we did. Because they did it again last year. I just couldn't make it out because I had my farm running. So they were able to get people who saw the trip, believed that it was a healthy, safe experience, went back with them on the journey, and they went over to some different regions. And it's the beginning of it to where you start being able to bring value to the people who are trying to bring value to the farms and the farmers. And it starts to get us in cannabis in the U.S. to realize, for so many of us, that we're not the fucking like the story. We're a chapter of the story. We're the ones that have the best internet, but we don't own the cannabis world in any way, shape, or form in terms of like usage or knowledge. Because really, us and like Australia are the last on the fucking list. So Eastern Europe has had fucking herb in it for 6,000-7,000 years. We only herb comes into the United States, through hemp in the eras when they had to create hemp as rope. But drug cannabis really kind of comes into the U.S. in the 1900s from Mexico. And that begins the American smoking culture, and musicians and that Southern California feel. Instantly, it gets demonized by the media. So that's when they start to use marijuana as a negative word. And I always tell people, if you take a look at the paper in America and it tells you the Mexicans are going to take your fucking jobs, realize that was the headline in 1910 too. So in 1910, it said Mexicans going to steal your jobs. Then they realized that they could get the blacks caught up in it too, And at that time, we're talking, America's racist, like just coming out of the fucking slave area, basically. So you got these slave master mentality running the country. They're like, oh, we can go fuck the Mexican, and as a benefit, we can fuck the black. So they swept the black up, and they use a narrative to go against the black. They sweep the Mexican, go the narrative there. They use marijuana as this derogatory term. And all this usage of cannabis had nothing to do with cannabis. It was the fact that the people that were running the U.S. were fucking brutal racists and demonized the substance to get an agenda. And then when, the industrial cronies figure out the value of it and they realize it's a replaceable product for petroleum, Hearst, who didn't want to lose the forests, right? So Randolph Hearst is the newspaper magnate. So he has the ability to create anything he wants in the news. He's also the world's largest timber holder. And so hemp was a direct threat to Hearst's timber fucking production. DuPont had just came out with nylon not that long before, and he was like, oh, fuck you, I'm not losing this patent. And Rockefeller was basically, Rockefeller's a unique fucking guy. And if you really look at Rockefeller and the way he was raised by his dad, where his dad tried to fuck him over every day, him and all his brothers, the dad was trying to teach him how to be ruthless, brutal businessmen. So Rockefeller's background is just fucking brutal. And he was the right guy to be brutalized because he internalized that brutality and then exemplified it in his business practices. And when he gets broken up as a monopoly by the U.S. is when almost every oil company in the United States is formed because he owned the fucking country. I mean, fuck, his chokehold on oil was similar to Hershey's chokehold on chocolate. So at one point in time in the U.S., I think like 95% of all chocolate sold was from Hershey. So when you have a control like that, it also takes a certain type of individual. So Rockefeller's just fucking lunatic to me when you really look at the way he approached business and cracked shit down, and he switches into education. The educational system he switches to, same thing, it's anti-cannabis, but it's also anti-expression because what he wanted from the educational system was fucking workers to work in the factories. So the U.S. educational system was developed, and I'm not an educational expert, but you can read this shit, was really developed to get people from agrarian lifestyle into factories. How do you get people to work in a factory? You got to bring them in a building. You got to let them piss on a schedule. You got to make them hold the hand. You put standardized information in front of them that's designed to figure out who's good at running the job, who's good at working on the job. And if you don't fit into that window, you're fucked. And cannabis, to me, was a drug that allowed people to transcend the brainwashing. And I think that was one of the things that, we really don't talk about in terms of why it was so easily demonized by so many entities, is that they realized that not only does it compete with these products, but herb allows you to see people in a more human way. And so when it does bring races together. When you're all smoking weed, they're not Mexican, black, Asian, and white. You're just four people. And I think that herb's ability to create these internal ties that bind based off of decency is a fucking problem when you're trying to segregate nations so that you can have internal conflict. And now we just use the internet. Now we just throw some shit on the net. Everyone loses their fucking minds. Nervous breakdowns. I mean, full on nervous break. And I watch this shit and I'm just like, wow, you're losing your fucking mind. What are you doing in the rest of your day? I mean, so,
Whoa.
but it's always been done. And herb is this substance that inherently brings, I think, really nice traits out in people. And that's kind of what I wanted to be able to do, through those medical era, was to get people to be able to benefit from the plant in its totality, even though I barely understood it. So I just know that when you have benefit derived by individuals with very little reciprocity required, meaning that all they have to do is basically show up and be decent, it allows you to make massive, massive cultural changes. and I had really no idea of the totality of cannabis usage in terms of how it was used historically. Where, I mean, fuck, like we knew it was a thing, but like when you go to Pakistan, every single farm has a field that they harvest for the seed for food and then the resin for medicine. And the seed is critical. They stack fucking bags of that shit up because they need it for the winter. So it's a life-saving food source in their world for 2,000-3,000 years.
Did you try any dishes that were specifically designed around cannabis seeds?
No, we ate cannabis seeds, but they don't have that same. We do. We weave all these things like, and I would say you have like bhang and stuff in India, but that's just the milk drink of that you're and honey that you're drinking cannabis in. But otherwise, they integrated the smoking with the tea with the prayer. So the prayer was heavy where like if because Pakistan's the most Muslim country in the world. And so you get to see people who are very religious believers of their faith and how they enact it and how they practice it. And the prayer is just to stop and say thank you and that I'm insignificant. So it's a moment of humility. And then the tea is tranquility, and then the cannabis is like uplifting, changes your tone. And so you'd notice through the course of a day, the prayer, the tea, and the smoke all kind of went together. And they wove it in this really seamless manner. And that was what was so fascinating, was that they'd had it with them for so long that it was normal. So like they didn't smoke flower, but I mean, there was nobody we bumped into that didn't have a fucking ball of hash in their pocket. I mean, like
Nice.
it was really interesting. I mean, I got to smoke a lot of fucking good hash. When I showed up, they had half a key for us. So they had 500-gram fucking balls. And then Numi, my partner Numi, man, he had a fucking bag from Tira that was a goat ball, right? Like goat ball hash. They took the testicle ball sack off of a fucking goat, and because that was the original Ziploc bag, right? So humans have been used. Whenever you see people drinking water in the past, they were using like a goat skin that was sealed, and they would carry it. They would drink out of the goat. Now we consider that shit just impossible. Well, the reality was for thousands of years you were drinking out of fucking goat skin. So the goat balls aren't fresh in the bag. They've been going for a while. But the bag, because of the way it holds the temperature and it also has microbial life, it interacts with the hash, and it's almost kind of like a semi-ferment. And I've had people ferment stuff, but I've never been over to like Malawi and tried a Malawi cob in Malawi. So I don't know.
You've never fermented in goat ball sack before?
Yeah, they're doing something. But like, you're cracking up and you're like, I'm going to smoke the goat ball hash. And it was just fucking phenomenal, right? And so, you're dying because we're showing pictures of this shit, and all the new people in cannabis are losing their minds because nobody's wearing rubber gloves. This isn't sterile and clean. How could these people survive? And you're like, well, they've been smoking this shit for fucking thousands of years. I think if there was a problem, we'd be dead by now.
Fucking kill it with fire.
It's crazy. Yeah, it was just really just so pure and simple and humbling, and the Muslim culture was really interesting because I've never really been exposed to it. And the way they approach visitors and tourists and strangers was one of absolute reverence to the individual. So no matter where I went, and so it wasn't orchestrated because we traveled 1,300 miles. You can't bribe everybody for 1,300 miles. So no matter where we went, the locals that would bump into you were amazed that, especially because I'm fucking white, right? They haven't seen a white person in 20 fucking years. Like maybe for some of these people ever. Like they wanted to touch you and see if the shit was coming off your arm.
Yeah.
It was this purity of like, why are you here? And I'm like, oh, I'm here to visit the country. And they're like, and you're having a good time? I said, I'm having a great time. And it almost made them look like they were going to cry because they wanted to see the image of their country change. 9/11 fucked them up. When Bin Laden was in the caves, when we went to war and did all that wreaked that havoc, it just destroyed the Pakistani economy, and so many people had to leave the country to go find survival and success. But they also are Pakistani. And so years later, they can look back at their country and say, wait a minute, how do we do something for our native home? And that was how Landrace Pakistan and Let's Be Friends Pakistan kind of came to existence. Was grown men who were sharp, who are Pakistani by descent, who wanted to be able to do something positive for their country and their people. And you could tell the purity of the desire from the way you were treated and the way everyone around them was treated. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. It really was. It was 10 times greater than I thought it was going to be. And I had dreamt of walking in Pakistan my whole life.
You said that you filmed it. Is that film, is it being produced or is it already released?
No, I'm not in control of the film part. Danny's team did all the film work. So he releases clips, but I believe at some point, you know how it is when you do film? It's the editing that's brutal, right? When you
Same
with
the podcast.
When you got to edit
Yeah.
down, you got to cut and clip and break, and then put it all together in a form that allows people to want the sit down time. It's comprehensive, but they brought drones, and the drone footage is absolutely awe-inspiring. Like the quality of the footage that they took, it was like Nat Geo level shit. Gorgeous,
That's
because
so
Raul's
cool.
a really, really talented filmmaker, and so's John. He's Red Films Online, and he just got an award for his short. He's been doing some like horror shorts, and he's doing good, man. He's a talented young guy, and so you had and Danny's infectious with his enthusiasm for what he does, and so what you had a really good like media team capturing it. So I know at some point it'll come out, and what we've tried to do is just basically anytime they release a clip, then we just all network up to push it out so people can get a view of these regions in a way that you normally can't.
Are there some of these clips on your Instagram or?
Yeah, you can go to, and I would say go to GW Smoke Break, and then there's, if you go over to what I'll do too is I'll share you over deals.
You can send me the link later, and I'll add it to the show notes.
One of the guys that we were with there is a professional photographer, really talented. So a lot of the stuff you see me sharing all the time, that's him sending me footage of him exploring Pakistan.
Cool.
And so I just told the guys, I said, yeah, let's just create this window so that people who want to see something beautiful can. And then we did the collection. I gathered up all the stock for him, and it was beautiful. We got to do it as a team, right? So it was talented Pakistanis, Europeans, and myself all looking for outliers out of all these fields. And then I was able to get a chunk of the collection sent back, and I was able to give it out and provide it to people. And so I brought a bunch of it to the high tea, but I gave it out all over the place so that people could get access to things that you normally can't, and you get to experience a world that doesn't exist today in terms of flavor profile. So it gives you what I always call like new paint. It gives you new paint to be able to work on things that are existing and work. Like, and we'll use like the Oreo clone, right? So the Oreo clone is probably one of the best plants you could ever grow in every. It just does. It grows well, but it's kind of bland, and so it has incredible agronomic qualities, but it's kind of like Purple Punch. Purple Punch is a sexy, sexy girl, but she's got no flavor.
I think
So
Purple Punch has no flavor, but I
don't
think
think it has
Oreos is
any-
nice. I think Oreos is underappreciated.
I like Oreos as a light smoke, but if we looked at it as a, how does the market look at it, right? Bigger picture than just me and you, low on the appreciation
Yeah,
for the
people
profile.
don't like it.
So,
I like a
But
lot
what
of
you
stuff
under-
people don't like, though.
yeah, but that's okay.
Mhm.
What we do is we use those products that carry such incredible traits, and then we repaint them. So when your house looks like shit, you don't burn it the fuck down. You just repaint it. And I think that that's the way you approach genetics, is that what we've done now is we've steered towards agronomics and COAs more than we've steered towards experience, because the vast number of people who shop off of price and potency. So when the metrics of purchase are price and potency, the majority, and I'd say everybody does it, but no, fucking majority do, that changes what fits into the system. And when you're trying to pitch money to build an operation, you got to let these people know you're going to get 100 grams per square. You're going to get it every 62 days, or they don't give you the money. So once you commit to this process, you're kind of stuck in it. And what it does, there's only so many cultivars that give you 29% in 62 days that the market will take, and then the buyer has to be able to put it on Instagram too, or otherwise it's not fucking real. So you take all these new varieties that have been steered and pushed, and you bring back in the vigor. You bring back in an outcross from separate genes that are completely unrelated. And you get to, in my opinion, a degree of like semi-heterosis. You get a higher level of vigor, right? So it's not true F1 because they're not inbred lines, right? So your line and this line isn't inbred, but genetically they're as fucking far apart as you get. And what it does, it allows you to start to see what the things from Pakistan impart to the things that we have now. And when I use these tools over the last couple of years, what I get out of it almost always is a way better water usage, where the plant only has to water half as often as it did prior. So the uptake mechanism changes dramatically. I get an ability to produce at a lower food load. So the plants have been built on lower humus levels because really it's this calcium-rich sandy, I'd say sandy loam, but it's like sandy loamish clay. It's this gritty, man. The soil's gritty. It's all glacier. So very little biological matter to give you nitrogen. So
No
lower
nitrogen.
nitrogen.
Yes,
Yeah,
no
very low
nitrogen.
nitrogen.
Yeah,
You get it from animal deposition when they take the
yeah,
fields and compost. But
yeah.
where is all your biological material that's going to break down and form it? You don't have it. So the plants adapt to that. And I also see better cold hardiness. And I also see profiles that we just don't have. So the ability to create a profile that's a choky sulfur that when you smoke it, that shit is grabbing you and shaking you like a dog. And you're not going, oh, I'm going to take another one. You're trying to find oxygen in the room, and your nose and your mouth you're running. That kind of stuff is like old school experience from when you're a kid. And that's kind of what I get out of the hybridization using it. And so I do pure preservation where I take, and if you're doing preservation for anything that's like this, you really need like 10,000 plants. So I know that these aren't true preservations, they're steered preservations, but at least we're holding something, and we're able now to be able to connect like the farmers of Ghazni, Afghanistan to people in Oregon, the farmers from Nagar Valley, Pakistan to the people in Southern Humboldt. You know that this is where this came from, and the ability for you to use it as a tool is critical. And the only way that you can really hold things is in seed, right? Because if you're holding cologne, the idea of holding cologne forever, do that shit your whole life and tell me that's how you want to spend your whole life, where you never endingly have a fucking house full of plants that are priceless, that must be tended continuously. How many times you going on vacation? How many times like I've been doing my whole life. That's what got me into commercial nursery work. It's what we got me into cryobanking. It's what the basis of the Grateful Head is. It's this idea that I just fucking do not want to hold plants at scale personally. And so we can S1 stuff, but you're having the fucking genetic, and selfing is fine when we're steering for production needs. We're trying to create breeding lines. But for preservation, you want as much gene pool as possible. And what I learned from the Pakistanis and the Afghanis, and I also learned it from a redwood propagator, which really changed my view of preservation, was that you have to make selection, but you have to include as much as material as possible, because you don't know where the alleles that are needed for resistance in a problem in the future live. So when you start to narrow a line, it's kind of like genetic drift, right? But it's accidental. Genetic drift is where you and I are breeding a project, and we have traits of interest that are our focus. Over the course of the project, we lose focus and we start to move the selection away from those original selections. And what happens over the course of so many years is the thing that you're working with is the same gene pool, but the traits that you wanted are no longer present. That shit isn't in it. So people like, you can take anything and get anything out of it. I'm like, no, you fucking can't. It doesn't work that way. If that shit's not present anymore because in the gene transferal and movement of the breeding, it left, it's not present. So what we want to be able to do is have as much as possible. So the way the Pakistanis worked it is, even if they have, let me get this plug in so we don't lose power. Even if they had their favorite plant, right? They didn't just use the favorite plant. They just threw in one or two more handfuls of seed into the bag. So every female yielded seeds, but they would just always throw a little bit more of their favorite shit. So they had a little more of their favorite shit cycling through. But what they know is that when you make a mistake with agriculture and you focus on agronomics and you don't focus on survivability, what you get is fucking starvation. And so it was this really, really clear picture where for the first time I could see it in person. And it was the same with sharing genes. No farmer hoarded anything. If your neighbor wanted your shit, they got it. If there was better genes in Afghanistan and similar regions, they brought it in. It didn't make a difference. Nobody hoarded. Each person, every village, I'm like, what's your lines? And they said, oh, we have just common gene pool. And we share, and we always try to steer towards best diversity, best outcome.
You know why this is? Because in this kind of cultures, everybody relies on the neighbor. Everybody relies. This is the survival in these regions. You cannot survive without being, normally this is not the Western culture. And Western culture means like you have your door closed and locked down. But in these cultures, like also my culture was like this in Yugoslavia. Even now, we don't have our door locked.
Yeah, we have a very different culture. All right, let's get some questions this way, because others we're just running on.
Man,
Honestly, we're talking about it, and you're similar to Michael Wolff Segal, that you talk and you don't breathe. But honestly, for us, this is great. We're just sitting on the couch listening to you, and even when I want to ask a question, I realize I should probably just shut up, because if I say anything, I'm just gonna throw you. Oh, we lost him again. Due to technical difficulties, we had to stop the recording here, but we got back on a week later. This episode will be continued next week.
This episode of Gabbing with Gaby is brought to you by the Breeders Direct Seed Company. In my opinion, the Breeders Direct Seed Company is your premier source for clones and seeds, and they are the only place that you can get the Gaby Staten Island collection. So visit Breeders Direct for all your seed and clone needs.